Hey, my name is Caleb and I'm 26 years old. I live alone in a small cedar shingled house on the edge of a dirt road in rural Montana, the kind of place where the sky feels too big and the afternoons smell like dry grass and pine needles. The house isn't much, just one story, a squeaky screen door, and a porch that leans a little to the left, but it's mine. I wake up before the sun, brew coffee in a dented pot, and head out to whatever odd job the local farms need done. Fixing fences, patching barn roofs, hauling feed. It's honest work and it keeps the lights on. I don't talk much, never have. Growing up, my dad taught me that a man's worth is in what he can fix with his hands, not what comes out of his mouth. After he passed when I was 19, I stayed in Montana to look after Mom. She's in a nursing home in Billings now, and I visit when I can. The rest of the time, it's just me, the radio tuned to an old country station, and the quiet that settles over the fields like a blanket. That day started like any other. The sky was overcast, a dull gray that made the hills look softer than usual. I'd spent the morning at the Jensen farm patching a chicken coop roof that had taken a beating from the wind. My flannel was damp with sweat, my hands streaked with sawdust and tar. I was on my way home, boots crunching on the gravel shoulder of County Road 12, when I heard a voice cut through the stillness. "Excuse me, could you help me with my gate?" I turned. Across the road on the other side of a patchy field stood a woman. She was leaning against a sagging wooden gate, one hand shading her eyes. Tall, slim maybe, in her early 40s, though it was hard to pin down. Her dark brown hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands escaping to frame her face. She wore a white button-up shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, the hem smudged with dirt. Her jeans were faded, tucked into scuffed boots. There was something tired in her posture, but her eyes, hazel sharp, held a kind of steadiness that made you look twice. I crossed the road, my toolbox clanking against my hip. Up close, she smelled faintly of lavender and earth, like she'd been digging in a garden. The gate was in rough shape, one hinge rusted, through the post splintered where it met the ground. Nothing a hammer, a few nails, and some elbow grease couldn't fix. "I'm Leah," she said, her voice a little husky, like she'd been shouting or hadn't spoken in a while. "Leah Monroe. I just moved in a few months ago. This thing collapsed yesterday and I can't get my truck through." "Caleb," I said, tipping my cap. "Gate's seen better days. Give me an hour." She nodded and stepped back, giving me space. I set my toolbox down and got to work. The air was cool, the kind of late September chill that hints at winter. Leah didn't hover. She didn't try to make small talk or offer unsolicited advice, which I appreciated. Most folks can't resist filling silence. She just stood by the fence, arms crossed, watching the clouds drift. Every now and then, I'd catch her glancing at me, but when our eyes met, she'd look away like she hadn't meant to stare. I pried the broken hinge free, the metal groaning in protest. The post was worse than I thought, rotted at the base. I'd need to replace it. I had a spare piece of cedar in my truck, cut from a job last week. As I hauled it over, Leah spoke up. "You do this for a living?" she asked. "Sort of. Fix what needs fixing, farms mostly, whatever pays." She nodded like that made sense. "You know your way around a toolbox." "Dad made sure of that," I said, hammering the new post into place. "Said a man who can't fix his own problems doesn't deserve to complain about them." She let out a soft laugh, not mocking, just warm. "Sounds like a practical man." He was. The conversation stopped there. I liked that she didn't push. Some people hear you mention family and start digging, asking about siblings, hometowns, what you had for breakfast. Leah didn't. She just watched me work her shadow, stretching long across the dirt as the clouds parted and the sun peeked through. I tightened the last bolt, gave the gate a test swing. It opened smooth, no creaks, no wobble. Good as new. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped back. "There you go," I said. "Should hold till next spring at least." Leah tested it herself, pushing the gate open and closed. A small smile tugged at her lips, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to mean something. "You're a lifesaver, Caleb. Let me pay you." "No need. I cut in already, packing my tools. Just passing by." She studied me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly, like she was trying to figure something out. I wasn't used to being looked at like that, not with curiosity, not with judgment, just like I was worth noticing. It threw me off, but I didn't let it show. Well, she said, finally brushing dirt off her hands, "If I bake an apple pie sometime, you won't say no, will you?" I chuckled, the sound rougher than I meant it to be. Pie's hard to turn down. She smiled again, bigger this time, and it hit me how pretty she was. Not in a flashy way like the girls I'd known in high school who wore too much makeup and laughed too loud at parties. Leah's beauty was quieter. It was in the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the way she stood like she'd seen a lot but hadn't let it break her. I tipped my cap again and started back toward my truck. The gate creaked softly behind me as she closed it. I didn't look back, but I felt her eyes on me all the way down the road. When I got home, I tossed my keys on the counter, cracked open a beer, and sat on the porch. The sky was turning pink, the kind of sunset that makes you forget the day's aches. For the first time in a long time, I wondered what tomorrow might bring. The days after that first fix-it job slipped by in their usual rhythm. I'd wake at 5 coffee black and scalding, then head out to whatever farm needed me. Mornings were for fences and feed bins. Afternoons for oil changes or patching irrigation lines. By dusk, I'd be home, boots caked in red clay, muscles humming, with the kind of tired that feels earned. Montana doesn't hand out easy days, but it gives you space to breathe. I started noticing Leah more. Not in a stalking way, just glimpses. She'd be out by the white picket fence that ran between our properties, the one that looked freshly painted even though the rest of her place still carried the faint neglect of a house that had sat empty too long. Some mornings she'd be watering the flower beds she was coaxing back to life, marigolds and lavender, mostly stubborn little things that refused to die. Other times she'd just stand there, arms folded on the top rail, staring at the horizon like she was waiting for something to appear. I figured she'd been a city person once. The way she held herself, shoulders back, chin level, reminded me of the executives who'd roll through town every fall for hunting season, all polished boots and clipped sentences. But Leah's edges were softer now, worn down by something I couldn't name. Her shirts were always pressed collars, neat even when she was elbow deep in dirt. Old habits, maybe? It was maybe a week later when she called me over again. I was pushing the old mower along the fence line, the engine coughing like it had a cold. The grass was getting high, I'd put it off too long. She appeared on her side of the fence, one hand raised in a small wave. "Caleb," she said, voice carrying over the noise. "You know anything about pumps? I killed the engine." "Depends on the pump." She pointed toward the small shed behind her house. "Irrigation's acting up. Water pressure's gone to nothing. I've got tomatoes that are about to give up on me." I wiped my hands on my jeans and followed her. The shed was tidy, tools hung in rows, bags of potting soil stacked like bricks. The pump was an older model, the kind every rancher swears by until it quits. I popped the cover, checked the belts, the intake. Clogged filter. Easy fix. 10 minutes, I said. She nodded and disappeared into the house. Came back with 2 mugs of coffee, real coffee, not the instant stuff I lived on. Handed me one without a word. We stood there while I worked, the only sounds the clink of my wrench and the distant low of cattle. "You always this quiet?" she asked after a while. "Pretty much." She smiled into her mug. "I used to manage a chain of clinics in Seattle. 30 staff, 3 locations." Silence was a luxury I couldn't afford. I glanced up. "What made you leave?" She shrugged, but it wasn't casual. Burnout. The kind that sneaks up until one day you realize you haven't slept through the night in a year. Sold my share, packed a suitcase, and drove east until the mountains looked right. I tightened the last bolt. The pump kicked on with a satisfying hum. Water shot through the hose in a clean arc. "There, your tomatoes are safe." She tested the spray with her thumb, watching the droplets catch the light. "Thank you, again." I started to leave, but she stopped me. "Stay for a bit, I've got sandwiches." I should have said no, I had chores, a fence post to replace before dark. But I followed her inside anyway. Her kitchen smelled like basil and fresh bread. The table was set for 1 plate napkin, a single glass of water. She pulled another plate from the cupboard without asking, sliced a sandwich in half. Ham and Swiss thick cuts of tomato from her own vines. We ate standing up, leaning against the counter. "You grow all this?" I asked, nodding at the tomato. "Trying, first year. Everything's a little crooked, but it tastes better that way." I took another bite. She was right. After that, the helps became routine. A leaky faucet in the guest bath. A shutter that wouldn't stay latched. Each time she'd have coffee ready or lemonade if it was hot. We'd talk while I worked, never about anything heavy. The best way to stake tomatoes, how to keep deer out of the corn, the difference between a Phillips and a Robertson screwdriver, safe topics, easy. One afternoon, I was tightening the chain on her riding mower thing, was older than both of us combined when she brought out a plate of oatmeal cookies still warm from the oven. I ate 3 before I realized it. You bake like this all the time, I asked, mouthful. Only when I'm avoiding something, she said. Then quieter, or when I want to say thanks without saying it. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just nodded and kept working. The conversation stretched. She told me about the time she'd delivered a baby in the back of an ambulance during rush hour. I told her about the winter I'd spent rebuilding my dad's old Ford after it rolled into a ditch. She laughed when I described the cow that had wandered into the shop and refused to leave until I gave it half my sandwich. We never crossed the fence line. Not really. But the space between us started to feel smaller. One evening, I was splitting firewood in my yard when I saw her watching from her porch. The sun was low, painting everything gold. She raised a hand, not a wave, just a lift of fingers. I lifted mine back. Then she went inside, and the light in her kitchen window stayed on long after dark. I stacked the wood higher than I needed to, kept my hands busy, so my mind wouldn't wander to places it had no business going. Leah was older. She'd lived a whole life I knew nothing about, and I was just the guy who fixed her gate. But that night when I finally went inside, I left my porch light on, just in case. The storm rolled in without warning the way they do in Montana sky bruising, purple wind, picking up like it had somewhere urgent to be. I'd finished splitting the last of the firewood and was stacking it under the eaves when the first fat drops hit the tin roof. By the time I got inside, the rain was a roar, sheets of it slashing sideways across the windows. Thunder cracked close enough to rattle the glass. I turned on the radio for company, but static swallowed the signal. Just me in the storm. I was nursing a beer, feet up on the coffee table, when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, almost lost in the downpour. I figured it was the wind playing tricks until it came again, harder, insistent. I opened the door and there was Leah, soaked to the bone. Her hair was plastered to her cheeks, shirt clinging like wet paper. She held a wicker basket against her chest, one arm wrapped around it like it might fly away. "Caleb," she said, teeth chattering. "Power's out. I baked apple pie, but I've got no light to see if it's done." Water streamed off her in rivulets. I stepped aside without thinking. "Come in before you freeze." She hesitated on the threshold, dripping onto the mat. "I don't want to track mud everywhere. Floor's seen worse." I took the basket, set it on the counter. "Sit by the fire." The living room was dim, lit only by the orange glow of the wood stove. I'd kept it banked low, but it threw enough heat to chase the chill. Leah peeled off her sodden jacket, hung it on the back of a chair. Underneath her t-shirt was nearly transparent, but she didn't seem to notice or care. She rubbed her arm's eyes on the flames. I grabbed a towel from the bathroom, handed it over. "Here, thanks." She dried her face, then her hair movements quick and efficient. The towel came away streaked with mascara. She noticed, grimaced. "Great. Raccoon eyes." "You're fine," I said, and meant it. She laughed, a short surprise sound. First time I've heard that in a while. I stoked the fire, added a log. Sparks shot up the chimney. The pie sat on the counter, still warm, the lattice crust golden even in the low light. The smell, cinnamon butter tart apples, filled the room like a promise. "Smells like my mom's," I said. Leah's smile softened. "Recipes older than both of us. My grandmother wrote it on an index card. I still have it. I cut 2 slices, slid them onto plates. No forks, we ate with our hands, standing at the counter because the table was buried under seed catalogs and unpaid bills. The crust flaked. The filling was hot enough to burn the tongue. We didn't care. Outside, lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the fields in stark white. Thunder followed seconds later, shaking the floorboards. Leah flinched. "You okay?" She nodded, but her knuckles were white around the plate. "I hate storms. Always have. In the city, you're 20 floors up, surrounded by concrete. Here, it feels like the sky's falling on you." I understood. After Dad died, I'd spent nights like this, listening to the wind howl through the eaves, wondering if the roof would hold. "House has stood since '52, I said. It'll hold tonight. She set her plate down, wiped her fingers on her jeans. Mind if I borrow a lantern? I've got candles, but I'd rather not burn the place down. I had an old kerosene lamp in the closet. I lit it, adjusted the wick until the flame burned steady and gold. Handed it over. Our fingers brushed, hers were ice cold. I didn't let go right away. You could wait it out, I said. Road'll be a mess. Flash floods in the low spots. She looked toward the window where rain lashed the glass in relentless waves. I don't want to impose. You're not. Another boom of thunder. She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them. Okay, just till it lets up. I pulled the rocking chair closer to the stove. She sat curling her legs beneath her. I took the couch. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was the kind that settles after you've said what needs saying and don't need to fill the rest. Minutes passed. The fire popped. Rain drummed the roof like fingers on a table. Leah spoke first. I used to love storms when I was a kid. Thought they were adventures. Then I delivered a baby in the back of an ambulance during a nor'easter. Power out roads, flooded mothers screaming. After that, they lost their charm. I nodded. I get it. Lost my dad in a blizzard. Truck slid off the road. Took search and rescue 2 days to find him. Her eyes met mine across the glow. I'm sorry, long time ago. Doesn't make it smaller. We let that sit. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that danced on the walls. Outside, the wind shifted, howling around the corners of the house. She leaned forward, elbows on knees. You ever think about leaving Montana, I mean? Starting over somewhere the sky doesn't try to swallow you whole? Thought about it, I admitted. After Mom went into the home. But this is home. Roots go deep. Seattle was supposed to be temporary. 10 years later, I woke up and didn't recognize myself in the mirror. Sold everything, bought this place sight unseen. Figured if I was going to fall apart, might as well do it where no one was watching. I poked the fire, sent up a shower of sparks. You're not falling apart. She gave a small, sad smile. Feels like it some days. The storm peaked, then rained so hard it sounded like gravel on the roof wind, screaming through the cracks. Leah's shoulders tensed. Without thinking, I moved to the floor beside her chair, close enough to feel the heat from the stove on my back. You're safe, I said quietly. She looked down at me, eyes wide and dark in the firelight. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she reached out, fingers brushing the sleeve of my flannel. Not a grab, just contact? Her hand was warmer now. I know, she whispered. We stayed like that until the rain eased to a steady patter. The power didn't come back, but the storm moved on, leaving the night washed clean. Leah stood stretched, the lamplight catching the curve of her neck. I should head back, she said, but didn't move toward the door. I walked her to the porch. The air smelled of wet earth and ozone. Her truck sat in the drive, headlights cutting through the mist. She paused at the steps. Thank you, she said. For the light. For everything. Anytime. She started down the path, then turned. Caleb, yeah. The pie was better with company. I watched her go, the lantern swinging at her side until she disappeared behind the fence. The gate creaked open, then shut. I stood there long after her porch light came on, the taste of apples and cinnamon still on my tongue, wondering how a broken gate had led to this. The county fairgrounds smelled like fried dough and livestock, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes for days. It was the first Saturday in October, and the annual harvest fair had drawn half the valley kids, chasing balloons, old men arguing over tractor pulls, women swapping recipes at the canning tent. I'd loaded the bed of my truck with crates of late-season squash and potatoes from the community plot I tended. Nothing fancy, but it sold steady. Leah had offered to help set up the booth. I hadn't asked. She just showed up at dawn with a thermos of coffee and a quiet smile. We worked side by side, arranging produce in neat pyramids, chalking prices on a slab of slate. The morning was crisp sky, the color of a robin's egg. Leah wore a faded denim jacket over a plaid shirt sleeves, pushed up hair in a loose braid. She moved with purpose, labeling jars of her own honey small batches from the 2 hives she'd started in the spring. Every now and then, our hands brushed, reaching for the same crate, and we'd both pretend not to notice the spark. By noon, the crowd thickened. Families, neighbors, tourists in Patagonia, vests snapping photos of prize pumpkins. Leah bantered with customers like she'd been doing it her whole life charming, without trying remembering names slipping extra apples into kids' bags. I watched her from the corner of my eye, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the easy laugh that made people linger. She fit here, more than I did some days. That's when he showed up. He was tall silver at the temples, wearing a navy blazer that looked out of place among the flannel, expensive watch glinting as he reached for a jar of honey. His eyes locked on Leah and widened in recognition. Leah Monroe. His voice carried over the chatter. From Seattle. My God, I thought that was you. She froze, smile faltering for a split second before she recovered. Richard. It's been a while. He pumped her hand like they were old colleagues at a conference, not standing in sawdust and hay. What are you doing out here? Last I heard you sold the clinics for what was it? 8 figures. Board. Was gutted to lose you. The words hit like gravel in my throat. 8 figures. Board. Clinics. I busied myself rearranging potatoes that didn't need rearranging. Richard kept talking, oblivious. Remember that gala in Vancouver? You in that red dress, every investor in the room wanted a meeting. And the keynote in Singapore, you had the whole hall eating out of your hand. Leah's laugh was thin. Ancient history, Richard. Nonsense. Talent like yours doesn't retire, too. He gestured vaguely at the fairgrounds pumpkins. I felt my jaw tighten. Pumpkins. Like what we were doing was quaint. Child's play. I caught Leah's eye. She looked trapped, cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth to respond, but Richard was already pulling out his phone. We should catch up. I'm at the lodge through Tuesday. Dinner, my treat. I'm busy, she said quickly. Too quickly. He shrugged, undeterred, and moved on to the next booth. The air felt suddenly thinner. I lasted another 10 minutes. Helped a lady load squash into her trunk-pocketed crumpled bills, made change from a coffee can. Every second, Richard's words echoed. 8 figures, gala, red dress. None of it fit the woman who'd burned apple pie in a power outage and laughed about raccoon eyes. Leah tried to catch my arm as I packed the empty crates. Caleb, I've got to get the truck turned around, I muttered, not meeting her eyes. Roads'll be a mess later. She started to speak again, but a cluster of kids ran between us, shouting about the Ferris wheel. I used the distraction to slip away. The drive home blurred. I took the long way past the river where the cottonwoods were turning gold. My hands gripped the wheel, too tight, knuckles white. It wasn't jealousy, though. Maybe part of it was. It was the sudden, brutal clarity of distance. She'd built empires. I fixed gates. She'd stood in rooms full of people who hung on her every word. I stood in fields full of people who needed their roofs patched before winter. I unloaded the truck in silence, stacked the crates in the barn. The sun was low, painting the hills blood orange. I didn't go inside, just sat on the tailgate staring at the fence line. Leah's porch light flicked on, then off again. She was home, probably wondering why I'd vanished. She came the next morning. I was splitting kindling, the axe biting clean through the wood with more force than necessary. Her truck crunched up the gravel. She got out, boots hitting the ground, soft hands shoved in her jacket pockets. Caleb. I swung again. Wood exploded into halves. Morning. You left. Had to get the truck out. That's not why. Another swing. The blade stuck. I wrenched it free. Doesn't matter. It does to me. She stepped closer, voice steady but edged with something raw. You're angry. I'm not angry. The words came out sharper than I meant. I set the axe down, finally looked at her. Her eyes were red-rimmed like she hadn't slept. I didn't know who you were. You know who I am, she said quietly. You know I burn toast when I'm distracted. You know I talk to my tomatoes like they're patients. You know I'm terrified of thunderstorms and that I cry at old country songs. You know I leave coffee on your step when I think you've had a long day. I opened my mouth, closed it. She wasn't wrong. That stuff in Seattle, she continued, that was a version of me. A suit I wore to survive. I sold it all because it was killing me. The money's in a trust. I live on what the land gives me now, same as you. I looked at the ground, at the splinters scattered like confetti. You could have told me. Would it have changed anything? Yes, no, I didn't know. Maybe? She took a step closer. I didn't want you to see me as the woman in the red dress. I wanted you to see me as the woman who can't get the gate to latch right. I laughed a short, bitter sound. I'm just the guy who fixes gates, Leah. You're the guy who showed up, she said, when no one else did. Silence stretched between us, thick as the morning mist rolling off the fields. I wanted to reach for her to erase the space Richard's words had carved out, but fear, stupid, stubborn fear, kept my hands at my sides. I need time, I said finally. She nodded once. Take it. She turned and walked back to her truck. Didn't look back. The engine started gravel spitting under the tires. I watched until the dust settled and the fence line stood empty again. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch with a beer I didn't drink, staring at the dark shape of her house. The gate between us had never felt so solid. 3 weeks, 21 days of silence that felt like a drought after rain. I threw myself into work mending the north pasture fence for the Millers, replacing shingles on the old Granger barn, hauling hay until my shoulders screamed. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from crossing the fence line. Leah's truck came and went. I caught glimpses of her in the garden sleeves, rolled high hair tied back with a bandana. She didn't wave. I didn't either. The mornings grew colder. Frost silvered the grass and the cottonwoods dropped their last leaves in slow spirals. I left my porch light off. She left hers on. Neither of us budged. I told myself it was for the best. She'd go back to her world eventually, maybe not Seattle, but somewhere with boardrooms and red dresses. I'd stay here fixing what broke, living on coffee and quiet. The gate was closed. That was that. Then came the morning that changed it. I was out back feeding the chickens I'd taken in from a neighbor who'd moved to Arizona. The sun was just cresting the hills, painting everything in pale gold. A soft knock sounded at the side gate, the one that opened onto the shared path between our properties. I wiped my hands on my jeans and went to see. Leah stood there holding a small wicker basket. Her cheeks were flushed from the chill breath fogging in the air. She wore an old wool coat collar turned up and her hair was loose, curling at the ends. The basket was lined with a checkered cloth. Beneath it I caught the earthy scent of fresh carrots. First harvest, she said simply. They're not pretty, but they're sweet. I looked at the carrots, twisted, knobby, dusted with soil. Real. Not the perfect ones from the grocery store. I took the basket, our fingers brushing for the first time in weeks. Neither of us pulled away. Coffee, I asked. She nodded. We didn't go inside. Instead, we sat on the top step of my porch, the basket between us. I poured from the thermos I'd brought out black, no sugar, the way we both took it now. Steam curled up and vanished. The only sounds were the chickens clucking and the distant low of cattle. I broke the silence first. That gate I fixed, the first day, it didn't need much. Just someone on the other side calling my name. Leah turned the mug in her hands, watching the liquid swirl. I know. Another pause. The sun climbed higher, warming the air. If I said I wanted that gate open from now on, she said, quietly, would you let me through? I set my mug down. Looked at her, really looked. The faint lines at her eyes, the way her mouth softened when she was nervous, the dirt under her nails from pulling those carrots at dawn. She wasn't the woman in the red dress. She was the woman who'd stood in my kitchen at midnight, soaked and shivering, trusting me with her fear of storms. The woman who left pie on my step without a note. The woman who'd seen me, not the toolbox or the flannel or the calluses, but me. I reached over and placed my hand on hers. Her skin was cool, but it warmed fast. She didn't move. Just let our fingers lace together, slow and deliberate. We didn't kiss, didn't make promises, didn't need to. From that morning on, the gate stayed unlatched. Leah would leave a mug of coffee on my step before I woke, still hot. I'd find a slice of bread or a jar of jam on hers when I passed by. Some evenings we'd sit on her porch swing, wrapped in the same blanket, watching the stars come out one by one. Other nights, we'd work side by side in the garden, hands in the dirt, talking about nothing and everything. We never moved in together, never hung a sign that said, couple. But the fence between us stopped being a boundary and started being a bridge. Some loves don't need grand gestures or labels. They just need two people willing to leave the gate open day after day until the space between heartbeats feels like home. And for us, that was enough.